update. Let's turn now back to domestic politics. I'm joined by the Shadow Communications Minister, Jason Clare. Jason Clare, thanks for your time. Looking at these speech notes from Scott Morrison ahead of his address at the Press Club, a lot of the messages are in line with the opinion piece written by the former Prime Minister Paul Keating recently, in the sense that expenditure's got to be below revenue, not push revenue through higher taxes above expenditure. This is the whole message that Keating had. We need to trim our own spending. The world's trimmed us, now we've got to trim our own spending. It's consistent with what Mr Keating had said.
Oh, it's consistent with what we've said. We've said there's a spending problem with the budget, but there's also a revenue problem. The key issue is always, where do you cut? And when this government has tried to cut, it's always hit people on lower incomes. It's always gone to things like GP taxes or pushing up the cost of university degrees. The government's been in power now for, 2.5 years, and it's got a pretty poor record. The deficit's gone up, not down. Debt's gone up, not down. Unemployment's up. Economic growth's down, and now this Prime Minister has been in power for 6 months and he hasn't done anything. I think most people would struggle to name 5 things that this Prime Minister has done. So the pressure's on. They've got to come up with some serious policy ideas to match the opposition. We're the ones who are pushing the policy agenda, not this government.
Isn't it easier for an opposition, though, Mr Clare, as you know, as a former minister yourself, that oppositions can put out ideas here and there, thought bubbles, policies, but the government's got to bring them all together and have an articulate, an integrated plan on there, not just tax reform, but the whole budget.
Kieran, this Prime Minister has the benefit of the whole public service to help him put together serious policies for the nation. The opposition doesn't have that advantage. We've got the assistance of the Parliamentary Budget Office to make sure all of our policies are properly costed. But unlike many oppositions in the past, we're doing the hard, serious work, coming up with big, bold policy ideas. And this government, all it does is talk. You know, if waffling was an Olympic sport, Malcolm Turnbull would win gold at Rio. All he does is talk. He could talk underwater with a mouthful of marbles. But the people of Australia need more than talk from this Prime Minister. They need him to actually make some bloody decisions, not talk, and that's all he does.
There'd be a few other people on the podium just quietly from this particular place if it was an Olympic sport, but let's look at the issue of negative gearing.
Isn't that the point? People are sick of the talking.
Okay.
They're sick of the talk, they want action, and this government is not delivering.
On the issue of negative gearing, though, are you sure that you've got the balance right on this? By going negative gearing and capital gains tax as well, isn't this overcooking it? Couldn't you? This is the argument from Saul Estlake and Chris Richardson. They say that if you did one or the other, that would be sufficient in terms of reining in the concessions when it comes to investment property.
Well, think about it. When you and I were at school, the cost of the average home was about 3 times average income. Now it's 6 times average income. And a lot of people watching this program would have kids in their 20s or 30s that are still at home, stuck at home because they can't afford to buy a house. Finally, there's a party with the guts to do something about this, and the policies that we've put in place are saying, if you want to invest in property, then go for it, but we want you to invest in new apartments and new homes because that will create more jobs, it will create more homes for people to live in, and as well, it'll give first home buyers the chance to buy their first home instead of having to compete against investors.
As a minister, as a member, I should say, from the Shadow Minister from Western Sydney, you would be reading this Infrastructure Australia report very closely, and the argument that Mark Birrell's saying, the chairman, is that we have to look at things like more direct road user payments, things of that sort. Also, maybe taking on more debt to build infrastructure. These things, though, don't look to be considered by anyone in politics right now. When he's saying that this could be the reality into the future if we want the sort of infrastructure for the growing population.
Oh, look, as a member of Parliament for Western Sydney, I know the problems of congestion very well. You know, coming into this interview means you're stuck in traffic all morning, and people do that every single day. This government's got a pretty poor record on infrastructure. It's spending less than it promised on infrastructure, and where it does build infrastructure like the NBN, we get a second-rate version of it. Malcolm Turnbull promised he could build the NBN, for example, for $29 billion. That's blown out to $56 billion. He said everyone would have the NBN this year. That's now blown out to 2020. He said that the cost of fixing Telstra's old copper to make his NBN work would cost $55 million. That's blown out by 1,000%, Kieran, out to 600 odd million.
Okay.
And Kieran, one final point, where they're starting to switch on the copper NBN in the Hunter and the Central Coast, it's not working properly. So this government has made a mess of the NBN and they've got a poor record on infrastructure.